Hi, welcome to Garden City Church KL Online. We hope this message equips you and gives you encouragement to live out your faith boldly and practically. If you want to learn more about our church, visit our website at www.gardencitykl.com or click the link in the description below.
So all the way at the beginning of this year, we started working through the replant to talk about who we are as a church, what our mission is, what our values are, and what we hope to see God do through our church. And over the last few weeks, we've been talking about what it looks like for us to live faithfully, stewarding and managing and leveraging all of God's resources, like our time, our talent, and our treasure, so that we might see those things that we have been praying for and we're asking God for become a reality. So you've had the last couple of weeks, if you've been here with us, to pray and seek the counsel of others about what it would look like for you, for everyone who calls this church their home, to take your next step in doing whatever it takes to advance Christendom in KL and the world. And today we're finishing the series by looking at treasure. And so if you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, I want to invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, and if you don't have your Bibles, that's okay. We're going to put it up here on the screen for you. Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." So Jesus is teaching us here that as desirable and valuable, all the things of this world, as they might look, they all have an expiration date. Now, treasure can look different for different people. For some people, their treasure is their clothes or their cars, their house, a holiday or entertainment or experiences. But whatever the case may be of the things that you treasure, Jesus is saying, don't store up that stuff here on earth. Even more so, because it's all fading. Even more so, the Bible talks about not only these treasures being perishable, the Bible talks about how our lives are a vapor. Our very lives ourselves are like a vapor that is here one moment and gone the next. A couple of weeks ago, last month, my family was in Indonesia and we were on the beach. And one of our favorite things to do on the beach is once the water is out and it's about to come back in, we'll dig like this hole and build this like barricade around it so that when the water comes in, it will make like a kiddie pool for our younger kids to play in. And so this time, I don't know why, the tide was coming in really fast. We were digging this hole and we were building this huge barrier, but the waves would come in and wipe everything out. And it was like all of our work, it was gone without a trace. That's essentially what the Bible talks about, how it talks about our treasure and even our lives. That it is here for a moment, but then the wave comes in and it's gone. Hopefully without a trace, with a trace for our lives. Have you ever thought about the foolishness of being buried with your treasure? The foolishness of dying, having accumulated all this stuff, but you can't actually enjoy it. You're leaving it behind for others to enjoy. Or your treasure might be junk to other people, and so you've left behind this huge mess for other people to have to deal with after you're gone. And it doesn't make sense. Rather, Jesus says, don't store up treasures on earth, store up treasures in heaven. An author by the name of Randy Alcorn, who wrote a small little book on generosity called The Treasure Principle, he says that you cannot take your treasure with you, but you can send it ahead. You can't take your treasure with you when you die, but you can send it ahead. And so that's what Jesus is talking about here. Now, exactly how this works, like what your rate of return or your return on investment is, I'm not exactly sure what that formula is, right? For every 10 ringgit you get, does that mean you get a larger mansion? So you pay you give extra 10 ringgit to God, you get a mansion that's one room bigger, or you get an extra gold bar. I don't know exactly what it translates into, but what I do know is that God keeps His word, and He is incredibly generous towards us. And this treasure is going to be imperishable. Whatever it is, it has to be awesome. It's going to be better than anything this world has to offer. So it seems like an easy choice, right? We want to invest in the treasures that are going to be in heaven, that are going to be everlasting. But it's not always easy, right? It's like saving for retirement. Like, I know in my head that if I invest small amounts of money over a long period of time, then that money is going to compound and it's going to grow, and I'm going to have a lot more in the long run. But the challenge is, even that small amount of money that I have to invest right now, I feel like I need it for today. Or when you were younger, at least when I was younger in elementary school, they used to do this test on kids. And the test was, they was trying to see how kids would react to this. The test was, I'll give you one M&M now, or one marshmallow, or one treat now, or if you wait 5 minutes, I'll give you 5 M&Ms. How many of you took the one M&M right away? A couple of you, you're being honest. How many of you waited 5 minutes? Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. But that's okay. I think you still get the point. Right? For Christians, it is always worthwhile and the wiser choice to invest in the long run for what is eternal. And then in verse 21, Jesus says, where your treasure is, your heart will be. And so what that means is, if you treasure the things of this world, then your heart will be tied to this world, and you won't invest in the eternal. But if you treasure the things that are of heaven, then that's where your heart will also be. So it's not, tell me what you love with your words, but I will see what your treasure is by looking at how you actually and functionally live your life. That's where your heart will be. And it can't be both. It's one or the other. So Jesus continues in verse 22. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now, I don't know about you, but I never really know that I want something until I see it. Right? Have that ever happened to you? You're scrolling on your phone and you come across something and you're like, ooh, what's that? And you start digging more into it, and all of a sudden you get interested and you feel like you need it. For me, that thing used to be guitars. I've shared this with you. Right? And so I would be on my computer scrolling through, looking at guitars. I didn't know I needed a new guitar. I already had like 3 or 4. But I would be scrolling anyways, and I see this guitar pops up, and I'm like, oh my goodness. One time Grace walked in while I was looking and scrolling through guitars, and I literally said out loud, I didn't even know she was standing at the door. I said, you are so beautiful. And she busted into the room and said, what are you looking at? I said, come here, look at this guitar. Look how beautiful it is. Look at the wood grain. So this thing that became, I like this thing, became, ooh, I love this thing. I want it, and I need it, and I can't be happy unless I have it. And so what did I do? I bought the guitar. And now after I had it, I would open it up from this case. I wouldn't even play it sometimes. I would just look at it and just be mesmerized by its beauty. I'll look into the wood grain. It even smelled wonderful. And it sounded like as if God made it with his own hands. It sounded absolutely heavenly. But then you know what I did? I kept scrolling. And all of a sudden, one day I came across a new guitar. That was newer, and it had better features. And you know what my heart said? I like that. I want it, and I need it, and if I don't have it, then I can't be happy. To the point where I started despising the guitar that I already had. Right? That's what our eyes do. And if I would just stop looking at things, if I would stop searching for things, then I wouldn't know to want it, and life would be so much simpler. So what are the things that you look at? Maybe it's holidays. Maybe it's what you wish your house or your home could look like. Maybe it's stuff. The new iPhone just got released. Maybe you're like, oh, I've got to have that. You see, our eyes literally give perspective to what is going on in our hearts. They're like sunglasses. You ever walk around midday, you have your sunglasses on because you need it, and all of a sudden it starts getting dark. You're like, why is it so dark outside? And then you realize, and you forgot you had your sunglasses on. That's like what our eyes are like. It gives perspective to everything that is going on in our hearts. And so if you're looking at and you are focused on the things of this world, your heart will become attached to it. And this is the point that Jesus is making. that you can't be looking at two things at the same time. Your focus in that case, will be divided. Your focus can't be on one thing. When I was younger, in middle school, I was in Korea, and I remember playing with my uncle, playing with my brother. We were there for my uncle's wedding. And we were playing on the playground, and as brothers do, we get into a little scuffle, and my brother is, right now, he's like 6'2", 225 pounds. He's a massive dude. He could tear me apart. But the one thing I had on him was speed. And so we get into the scuffle, and what do I do afterwards? If he puts his hands on me, I'm done, right? So I run. But we're on this playground, and my attention is divided. I am looking back to see where he is, because if he gets me, I'm done. But then there's this playground that I have to navigate so I don't get hurt. And before you know it, sure enough, I wake up, I had blacked out, I had run straight into a monkey bar. Why there's a monkey bar that low? The monkey bar is like, the two posts and there's a metal bar going across. I was so focused on my brother, I didn't know. I ran straight into that thing, broke my nose, my face, everything. It was absolutely terrible. And here's the takeaway from that. Your focus cannot be divided. If you try to live for the things of this world and the things of God, you will wreck yourself like I did. Your life will be an absolute mess. So Jesus continues, verse 24, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Again, you can only have one love. Now, have you ever thought about why does Jesus pick out money? Why does he pick out stuff instead of something else? I love this quote by C.S. Lewis. He says that prosperity knits a man to the world. Prosperity knits a man to the world. He feels that he is finding his place in it, while really it is finding its place in him. You see, the things of this world, our possessions and our stuff, have a way of entangling our hearts to this world. Because those things and money promise so much. They promise to give us security and freedom and pleasure and comfort, but they can't really solve our deepest problems. They can't fix our broken marriage. I would love to try that with one of my kids. Like, how much money do I have to come up with to pay to make my kids obedient? There may not be enough money in this world for that. But the secret to money and possessions is that they can only truly be enjoyed if God is first and foremost your treasure, or else you will be a slave to them. That's literally how Jesus talks about it in this text. That's the language. That you can only have one master. You can only love one thing. You can only serve one thing. And to that thing, you will be a slave. And if you are dominated, if you are a slave to money, then you will be dominated by it. Now, note what it does not say. The text does not say, Jesus does not say that money is bad. That's not what this is saying here. He doesn't say having lots of money is bad. And so if you're here this morning and you're rich, we're glad you're here. We're happy that you're here. Being rich is no more sinful than being poor, because money is neither good nor bad. Rather, what money often does is it magnifies what is already in your heart. So being rich doesn't make you a sinner or stingy or greedy. You could be those things, but poor people also can be stingy and greedy just the same. A poor person can love money and the things of this world just as much as a rich person. And your standing before God is no more affected by the fact that you have a lot of money than the person that doesn't have as much as you. Right? How do I know that? It's because a person standing before God doesn't depend on how much money you have. Right? Certainly, there are temptations and dangers that come with riches. Jesus is very clear about that. But what Jesus is specifically pointing and calling out is here in this text is the love of money. It's serving money, being devoted to it, living for money, and what you think it provides for you. He's going after how our hearts view and love money and where we find our joy. And so how do you know if you love the things of this world and the treasures of this world? Here are a couple ways you can tell. It's in your budget you have. If you worry about what you don't have or what you hope to have, if you are overly consumed by comfort and pleasure, if you think that money can provide security for you, if you are stingy, if you feel like you always need more, you are greedy, or if you're overspending more than what you have to gain those possessions, or you hoard, you save too much, you're oversaving. Because people think money will provide usually one of two things. They think money will provide security, and so they save, right? And there's some sense in having some resources to fall back on. But that money doesn't shield you from having hardship or suffering or ultimately death. And then the other group of people, usually they think money will provide them pleasure, and so they spend the money, right? Sure, I can think of a lot of different ways to have fun and spend money. But at the end of the day, after all those efforts to fill up our lives with those pleasures, usually you want more. You want the next thing, and you're never satisfied. And so rich people, they're often asked, how much is enough? You already have 100 million ringgit. How much more do you need? And you know what the overwhelming answer is? A little bit more. A little bit more. It sounds the same thing as people with less than them, right? It's never enough. See, we often think that money is the answer to so many things, but often it is the desire for money and possessions that creates those issues. Now, I'm going to give you a quote, but I don't recommend the artist or the song, but it is true. And Americans, you may know this. More money, more problems. Oftentimes, that is the case. And so I want to ask you, I want to give you a little test. If your job gave you a bonus, or let's just say someone gave you 5,000 ringgit. I've never had that happen to me before. Let's just say, hypothetically, that happens, right? But let's just say, what's your first thought to do with that money? How many of you would spend it? You're like, oh, the new iPhone came out, or I've been trying to save up for this holiday or this vacation. How many of you would spend it? Some of you can sense. How many of you would save it? You're like, oh man, like my savings is running low, and so I want to save it. How many of you? Okay, all right. Now the third question, of course, how many? No, neither of those are necessarily bad, but how many of you would ever give any thought to giving that money away? A couple of you. I love that. Does that even, the idea of stewarding and giving that money, does that even cross your mind? You see, good stewardship of our treasure and generosity are the overflow of the heart for both the rich and the poor in response to the generosity of God towards us. And so this is what we need to understand. We cannot truly experience joy and be fulfilled if we live opposite, if we live counter to the way that God created us. Our God is Trinity. He's a Trinity, meaning there are three persons but one God, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And for all of eternity, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, three persons, one God, have been existent in self-giving love. Right? And it is in that image, and it is in the overflow of that relationship that existed forever between the Father, Son, and Spirit that we were created. Out of the overflow and in that image. And so we were created to be like God, to give. And so Jesus would say, it is more blessed to give than to receive, because we find our greatest joy when we act like God in self-giving. Now, a lot of people will think, okay, well, let's say that I do that. Let's say I give all I have away and I live for God, but then what about me? Who will take care of me if I give away all that I have and I give myself away? Look at verse 25. Jesus says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not your life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away, and the Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Why do you worry about your clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Jesus gets right to the heart of things, doesn't he? How many people here struggle with worry? You don't have to raise your hands. Probably most of us. We worry about our future, our jobs, our kids, whether you'll get married or not, whether you'll have enough money to make it, will there be any relief from the hardships that I'm going through? And those are worthwhile things to give our attention to. But worry, I love this definition by Tim Keller. He says that worry is believing that God will not get it right. Worry is believing that God will not get it right. Jesus then says, worry, when it comes to God's faithfulness and his provision, it has no place in the Christian faith. He says that worry is actually for non-believers because they don't know the character of our God. Right? How many of you, or who of you, has worried so much that it's actually changed the outcome of things? Right? A couple of weeks ago, our kids, or Timothy, competed in a jiu-jitsu competition. And I was so nervous for him. It felt like I was about to go out there. My heart was thumping through my chest, and I was so nervous for him. Like, what's going to happen? Is he going to win? Is he going to lose? Could he get hurt? How much of that worrying in that moment changed the outcome of what happened in that situation? Zero. How much, if you're a student, how much does your grade improve by worrying? It's like maybe your baseline's 85. If I worry enough, I might be able to get it up to a 90 or 95. How much of your worrying when you're waiting for medical results does it affect the actual test results? Zero. None. If anything, our worrying makes things worse. And this is what oftentimes happens. We worry and we begin to live in a false reality of a million different possibilities as if they've already happened. Well, what if this happens and then that happens? What am I going to do? Is God going to provide? Will he be here with me? And you get so far out ahead of yourself that you're no longer living in reality. It's all hypothetical. It's all in your head. And so no wonder you get overwhelmed because God doesn't equip you for something that he hasn't called you to. It's all made up in your head at that point. You see, worry is an indicator that your heart is not set on God, but on the passing things of this world. And your heart senses that. Your heart senses that the things of this world, they're vulnerable, that it's unpredictable, there's uncertainty there. And so if you put your trust and your hope in, your joy in something in this world that is passing, whether it's money or possessions, you won't ever have peace. But if you trust in God, he is a firm foundation that cannot be shaken. Why? Because you are loved and valued by your Father, way more than the birds of the air or the flowers of the field. And God has given us no reason to worry. He's trustworthy. He's faithful. And he's going to provide for you everything that you need. Now, to be clear, a need is not, I need to take Grab Premium versus Grab Saver. Okay, that's not a need. A need is not, I have to stay at a 5-star hotel, not a 3 or a 4. Those aren't needs. Those are luxuries. And the promise that he gives to us is that he's got us, which means that we can be filled with extraordinary faith and take awesome and wise risks in doing whatever it takes to advance Christ's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And we can lay down everything that we have because we know that God will supply everything that we need. So with our lives and everything that we have, we are called to seek first his kingdom. It is a call to live for God and to put him first, to leverage our time, our talent, and our treasure, not for ourselves, but for the purposes of God. And with our treasure, with our finance, to give our first and our best. And so let me be clear. If we actually live this out, giving is going to cost you something. Giving is going to cost us something. If you are giving generously, then you're going to live at least a step or two behind the lifestyle that your peers are living. Your homes are not going to be as nice. Your cars, your holidays, the quality of stuff that we have is going to be lower than our peers. You're not going to be able to have or do everything that they do, and that's okay. Right? You don't have to. We as believers, we do not have to live our best life now, right? Because that's coming in heaven. But what you do need to do now is you need to leverage your life now, because you only have one, to leverage and invest in the eternal. And so my family, that's what we have decided to do. And so we give generously to this church, which means that we aren't able to do some good things, like to save up for our kids' college funds. There are 0 ringgit 4 times for each one of our kids, right? And it's a good thing that we want to do and desire to do if we had the ability to, but there's just not enough, and that's okay. Our priority is God and His church and its mission first. And that's ultimately what we want to disciple our kids in. That we as parents, that we don't live for them. That we live for God, and the greatest joy that we can have in life is teaching them and following in obedience to what Jesus has called us to put Jesus, and that's what we want to disciple our kids in. And so let me get really practical here on what this means for us as a church. Okay, first, let me just say, God doesn't call us to give and want us to be generous because He has needs. God's not a God of scarcity. God is rich. And He says, if I had a need, I wouldn't come to you. I don't need to come and ask for you to meet my needs. He's not in heaven worried as if Timmy, whether he's going to make his tithe this month or not. Because the mortgage in heaven is super expensive. If Timmy doesn't pay his tithe, man, I don't know how we're going to pay this mortgage. Right? That's not what He's doing. But the church does have real needs. And God is faithful in providing for the church and His people through the faithfulness of His people. And so here at our church, I'm going to pull back the curtain so that you know the status of our church budget for 2025 and even for 2024. We are what you call in the red. Right? Do you guys know what in the red means? I once had a friend who didn't understand what that meant. And so we had this computer software, and so he would keep swiping his credit card. And he said, Peter, man, you won't believe it. I keep swiping the card, and God just keeps multiplying the money. But for some reason, like the number isn't black anymore, it's red. I'm like, bro, that's because you're in the red. That means you're spending what you don't have. That money has run dry. It's not there anymore. Okay, so that's where our church budget is. It's in the red. Like, it's not sustainable like this forever, right? And we're not in the red because of poor budgeting or stewardship of the church. I don't think anyone will look at our budget and say it's being mismanaged or that we're spending too much on unnecessary things. But praise God, our church is growing, right? Easter of 2024, usually Easter is the largest weekend of any year in terms of church attendance. Easter of 2024, we had like 170-something people. It was awesome. The largest ever had coming back from COVID. There has not been a weekend in 2025 that we have been lower than that. About the numbers, we're concerned about what the people and individuals those numbers represent. That's what we really care about, that they're hearing and being discipled in the gospel. But as the church is growing, needs are growing. Ministries and opportunities are growing, and we want to be faithful to those things. And so we need to grow our giving to meet those needs. We need to get to a point where we are, as a church, self-sustaining. And it's going to take all of us being willing to do whatever it takes. Now, just so you know, we have partner churches from all over the world who have been incredibly generous to us. They paid for the 5 air cons that we had to replace in our kids' area. They're helping cover all of the renovations that are happening on the 7th floor. Like, if you've been up there, you know we got way too many kids and way too small of a space, right? Those are funds that we don't have in our budget. But those partner churches, they're excited about what God is doing here, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're saying they're with us. They want to support us, right? And as awesome as that is, we can't let others outpace their willingness to do whatever it takes and in their giving when it comes to our own church. Right? We have to be leading the way ourselves for our church and for our mission here in KL. Every one of us is called to steward, to leverage our treasure for advancing Christ's kingdom. It's not just for the rich and those who have extra. It is for everyone who calls themselves a follower of Jesus. Now, as you're hearing that, you may be thinking, but what if? But what if? It might be, but what if I don't trust you, the pastor, or the church? That could be a real thought that some of you may have. The pastor is trying to take my money. Right? I promise you I'm not. All right, we're happy to share our budget with you. You can see how little we spend on pastoral salary. But if you are not in a place where you can trust me or the pastoral staff or this church, then give somewhere else. Give to another church. Give to a place generously where you feel like those funds will be to good use. And then after 6 to 12 months, you've spent your time here and you've seen everything and you've been a part of the ministries here and you're still at a place where you're like, I still don't know if I can trust that guy on the stage. Right? He preaches too long and whatever else. That's okay. We would be happy to help you find another church where you can be fully engaged in the mission of God. Because that is what we desire for you, right? We don't want generosity from you. We want generosity for you because we believe that that is the best thing that is for your growth. But what if? Well, what if I give later when I have more to give because I don't have a lot to give right now? Listen, it is not about how much you give. It is whatever amount represents generosity for you. For some, it'll be a lot. For others, it'll be less, and that's okay. It's the same faithfulness and stewardship that God has called us to. But what if I'm a student, or I don't really have a job or make money? Back in the day, all the older people will understand this. I used to, when I opened up my first student, when I was in high school, a student banking account, and they gave me this paper slip that was a checkbook. And so every time my parents gave some money for allowance or for food or whatever, I would pull out that checkbook, and if they gave me 100 ringgit, I would make out a check for 10 ringgit, and I'll give it to the church. I still have it to look back and look at God's faithfulness and also laugh. Like, oh man, I wrote a check. The paper was worth more than what I wrote the check for. But if that's the situation, I want to encourage you. Giving is a discipline that you want to start, no matter how small. Because our giving is a reflection of us putting God first, and we want to ingrain that into every area of our lives. Parents, I want to speak to you for a moment. This is something that you need to disciple your children in. A lot of the reason that a lot of us who grew up in church, we have an unhealthy and worldly view of money because no one ever taught it to us. And I want to let you know that we as a church, we are committed to coming alongside you and partnering with you to disciple your children in this. And give them allowance based on how much they read. That's not like law, that's just what we do in our family, okay? So when they make the money, I sit them all down, I give them the money from all the books that they read, and then they're required to do 3 things. The very first thing is that they're required to give at least 10% of what they earned. And then they're required to put aside another 10% to just save it. And then the other 80%, they think they can kind of do whatever they want. Right? They can put extra in giving, they can put extra in spending, but with that spend money, it's another opportunity for us to steward our responsibility to disciple our children. And right now, they're all little spenders, so they take the 80%, they're like, this is my spend pong, I'll do whatever. And here's the great thing, we as parents, we still get to choose what they spend their money on. It's such a great setup. Dad, can I buy this with the money that I earned on this thing? No. It's awesome. I would commend it to you. But what if I have kids to provide for? I have aging parents and other responsibilities. I just want to say, I completely understand your situation. And so does Jesus. That's why at the end of this text, he says, each day has enough trouble of its own. Because what he's saying is that every day you have to choose to trust Christ again and again. Because each day is going to have its own worries, right? It's going to stretch you financially. It's going to grow your faith to give to God. But I just want to say, my family has been doing this for almost 20 years, and there has not been a single year where he's been unfaithful. He's been more generous to us than we have to him. And as we put him first in everything, he continues to be generous to us so that we can give more, and all of our needs are taken care of. But what if I really want to work hard now, and I want to retire early? Well, that's not necessarily bad. But what I would say is don't kill yourself to make all this money. You overwork yourself, and you lose valuable time with your family and doing ministry, that time that you can't get back. Making money that you're too old to enjoy when you finally get to retire. Obedience now to Jesus is much better than any leisure in life in the future. And let me just give you this one quick warning. Just because you are doing well financially doesn't mean that God is blessing you. Let me say that again. Just because you are doing well financially doesn't mean that God is blessing you. There are lots of ungodly people in this world who don't follow Jesus, who are making lots of money, right? Blessing is not just being successful in life. Okay, that's usually how we oftentimes are tempted to believe what blessing is. Blessing is rather something that grows you closer to and makes you more like God. That's what a blessing is. Right, there are two places in our lives where we can really see this at work. Our dependence on God to provide for us, whether we trust Him or not. And those two places are prayer and money. Prayer because you understand that you're not in control, that you're dependent on God for everything. And the second is money because it's one of the most tangible places that we can become self-sufficient and not feel needy for God. I told you once before, when my wife and I just finished university, I remember we had a savings account. We were 25 or so when we finished university. And we opened up the savings account, and we had saved up about 100,000 ringgit. This is before we had kids. And I remember after depositing that money into the bank account, I went to Grace and I said, we are good. We are set. We have all this money in the bank, and there's nothing that can come our way that is going to touch us. Except it did. Surgeries and health issues and everything later, that 100,000 ringgit became zero. And I remember walking into the bank and sitting down in front of the teller saying, I need to close my account because you're now charging me $5 to keep this savings account open and I have nothing in there. And they're trying to convince me, well, you should just keep it open. I'm like, what? And I remember walking out of that bank thinking I was a fool to have trusted in that money, as if it could actually give me stability and security that I was hoping for. I still don't have that savings account to this day. Right? For the most joyful and fulfilled life, what you need is not more money or more experiences or more stuff. You need more of Jesus. He's all you need. There's nothing that you can add to Him that was going to increase your joy. And it's in living for Him that you find joy, because that's when you are actually living out your purpose. See, here's the thing about generosity. Our ability to be generous towards God, back to God, of all that He's given us, is a barometer of our righteousness. Now, I don't mean that as saying giving makes you righteous, but I am saying that giving shows that you are righteous, that you are reflecting who Jesus is and His righteousness working in you. And so here's how I want to wrap up our time. And when you came in today, you should have received one of these little cards. If you don't have a card, will you raise your hand so our volunteers can start passing these out to you? Do you have a couple of people? Carl, if you can help maybe get some of these cards to the people who have their hands raised. So this is a card. I know some of you don't have it in your hands right now, but for the sake of time, I'm going to start walking through it. This is a card that just walks you through, what are my next steps? What are my next steps in leveraging my time and my talent and treasure for God? And so you're going to see some blanks in here of how I can steward my time. For example, I commit to spending X amount of minutes in the Word each day. As a part of advancing Christ's kingdom in KL, I want to commit to sharing my faith with this many people this year. For talent, it gives you space to identify what your gifts are. What are the gifts and talents that God has entrusted you with? And then what are the ways that you can leverage those gifts in the church and in our city and in other places? It says, I know the Lord is the one who sustains my life, and I want to seek first His kingdom. Therefore, I commit to prayerfully give X amount of ringgit, whatever you decide, weekly or monthly or annually, as a part of my first fruits to God this year. And so I want you to take this, and I want you to sit down with God, and I want you to fill it out prayerfully. And this will be a good exercise for you to talk about it in your community group with other believers as well. Now, I want to let you know, we're not collecting these. There's no place for your name, right? So this is just for you to take and sit with God. You're not going to turn it into us. We're not going to see it and it's like, who didn't turn one of these in? Oh, this amount's too low. That's not what this card is. It's just for you to sit down with God and other believers to talk about what it would look like to do whatever it takes to advance Christ's kingdom. You see, Jesus and His mission, it's the only thing worth giving your life to advance His kingdom, for others to hear the gospel and to be discipled, for churches to be planted and nations reach for Christ. But it will only be worth it to you if you treasure Jesus for who he is. It'll only be worth it to you if you treasure Jesus for who he is, if he is your greatest treasure. And if he is your greatest treasure, then you know that in him you have everything that you need. One of my favorite verses in all of Scripture is Psalm 16:11. It says, "You make known to me the path of life." You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. So basically the psalmist is saying there's pleasures in forever quantity, and the quality is the best. If you have Jesus, you have everything that you need. You see, God our Father loves us, and he promises that he's going to take care of all of our needs. Look at the generosity of God to us in giving us his son Jesus, and with him all things. He gives us the forgiveness of sins. He gives us eternal life and a heavenly inheritance as sons and daughters, not because we deserved it. No, we deserved death. But Jesus, though he was rich, made himself lovingly, he willingly laid down his life for us. And so we give our lives for him because he is worthy. If you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus this morning, Jesus is inviting you. He is calling you to lay down your life so that you can find true life in him. He tells, during his ministry, he told this parable about how a man went out into a field and he dug into the ground and he found this treasure. And he was so excited about it that he went and sold all that he had so that he could have that treasure. And what Jesus is saying, the point of that parable is, I am that treasure. It is worth leaving behind everything. It's worth laying down everything for the sake of having him. And that gift, that treasure, is given to you free of cost. It is a free gift because Jesus has paid the cost for you. And so all he's asking you to do is to receive it.